Good morning, everyone, and welcome to EDP and Applied Mathematics Seminar. It's a pleasure for me to open session 73 of this seminar. Today we have two excellent speakers, Alfio Quarteroni and Juan Carlos de los Reyes. Introducing Alfio Quarteroni, we have to Professor Diego Souza. You can start, Diego.
Okay, so thank you very much, Juan. So for me, it's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Alfio Quarteroni. Professor Alfio Quarteroni is an Italian mathematician. He's a full professor of the numerical analysis at the Politecnico di Milano. He's considered for many people as one of the best applied mathematicians in the world. He have received many prizes and awards, and he has done write many books, about 26 books, and more than 400 papers, which is quite impressive. And today he's gonna talk about physics-based and data-driven mathematical model for simulation of heart function. Okay, so Professor, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the word is yours.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Juan, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here with you, even though it is only virtual. As you see, this is the title of the talk, and I'd like to show immediately what is going to be the conclusion of the talk. The conclusion of my talk is on what you see here on the screen. This is called the heart simulator. The simulator of the heart is a mathematical simulator. So what you see here is a real heart for a human person, which is beating, and you see the most important variables, physical variables that characterize this heart beating. What you see on this left-hand picture, these are the deformation, and the deformation is in a meter. So we go from 0 up to a maximum of 2 centimeters out of 8 centimeters. So it's a very big deformation, other than 25% of the deformation. What you see here on this upper part, to the right part, is what is called the left part of the heart, the left atrium and the left ventricle, and here you see the velocity field in meter per second. So you go from 0 up to 1.5 meter per second, which is fairly high. It's order of 50 kilometers per hour. And here you see the valves, which is the mitral valve that separates the atrium from the ventricle, and this is the aortic valve that separates the ventricle from the ascending aorta. And what you see down here is the electrical component of the variable, and this is the so-called transmembrane potential. Because in the heart, you have many different physical variables. You have the fluid, which is the blood. You have the structure, which is the forming myocardium. You have the electrical field, which is generated at every single heartbeat. And what you see in the middle is the complete heart beating with the fluid dynamics in the whole heart. So how do you get there? Well, you get there by starting from the real physical functioning of the heart. And as you all know, the heart is a pump, but it works because at every instant, there is an electrical stimuli that is generated in a specific part of the heart. It's called the sinusoidal node. And you have a generation of an electrical field, which propagates first on the upper part of the heart, which is the atrium, the right atrium and the left atrium, and then down there to the lower part of the heart, to the myocardium, which is the muscle of the heart. And this electrical field will generate a transmembrane potential on every single cell. And thanks to these ion channels, there will be ions that are going from the interior part of the cell to the exterior part of the cell. They generate a transmembrane potential, which is responsible for generating a force, which is called the active force, that will eventually allow this say, sarcomeres to slide, and therefore to every single cardiomyofibers to move, to relax and to contract, and globally speaking to the heart to relax and to contract. So those are the most important, say, components. What are we going to do? Well, we start from a clinical problem. We see a few examples of clinical problem. We go through the pre-processing, where we pre-process the data, the images. Then we create the mathematical model. We solve it numerically. We use techniques that are also borrowed from the artificial intelligence, in particular machine learning, to simulate the real behavior of the heart. So let me start from the pre-processing. Pre-processing means that we start from images. We have to go through the segmentation of images, to the registration in case of dynamical images, to the construction of surfaces, first of all, polygonal surfaces, and then to volumetric surfaces, which means the volumetric mesh. We generate a mesh for the volume, and then we generate the fibers. We'll see the fibers, and this will be before actually using the mathematical models, before using the partial differential equations. So how do we use images? We start from the computer tomography, and we use them to generate the shapes of the ventricle of the coronary, say. We use magnetic resonance, and we use them to compute the dynamics of these ventricles. We use MRI with late gadolinium enhancement to identify regions of scars, regions that have been, for instance, infarcted, and where there is no longer electrical excitation. And then use phase contrast, MRI, magnetic resonance, to identify boundary conditions. As you know, when you solve partial differential equations, you start from a domain. So typically you say, let omega be a domain and let the omega be its boundary, right? But what is the domain here? And what are the boundaries? Well, the domain is the heart of a specific person. What are the boundaries? Well, depending upon the type of partial differential equation that we're going to solve, we'll have different type of boundaries, as we'll see. And this is because we have to solve problems of different nature. We have to solve fluid dynamics in the four chambers, the atrium and the ventricles. We have to solve the electrical field in the myocardium. We have to solve the deformation, the mechanical structure, again in the myocardium. And therefore, for every single physics, we'll have different type of boundaries that we have to identify a priori. But this is not the end of the story in terms of data. We also need to generate what you see here on the right-hand side, which are the fibers. The fibers are very important. They change from patient to patient, from individual to individual. They are responsible to conducting the electrical field, but also to allow the heart to undergo a torsion. So it's very important to know them. And you cannot get them from images. So you need to reconstruct them from mathematical processes. And we are actually using partial differential equations to reconstruct the scalar potential, solving elliptic equations to identify this orientation of the fibers. And again, this is before starting with the partial differential equation. As you see here, the fibers, you go from the external part, which is the epicardium, to the internal part, which is the blue part, which is the endocardium, and you allow to consider the variation of the orientation of the fibers. And again, these are obtained by solving partial differential equations. Then you have the models. You have to model the electrophysiology for the creation of the electrical field, the generation of the force for every single fiber, cardiomyocyte, say, then the mechanics for the reformation of the whole heart, the fluid dynamics, the valve dynamics, the perfusion, because you have the coronaries that will feed the myocardium, and then connecting all things with the external circulation. And all these are mathematical models. So for instance, I will not enter the details, but for the electromechanical model, we have to go from the cell level, where you want to describe the ionic activity through the ionic channels, to the generation of the force that allow every single cardiomyofibers to slide, to the generation of the complete force, what we call the passive mechanics, for the deformation of the whole heart, and then to the electrical activity and their coupling. So we solve this in the heart, and we couple this with the external circulation for the lungs and for the lower and upper part of the body. And all this represents the electromechanical model. It's a multi-scale model because you go from the description of the cell membrane to the generation of the active force to the generation of the tissue mechanics, and therefore to the generation of the mechanics for the whole myocardium and for the whole heart cell. So this is the very first set of integrated partial differential equation. Then we have to address the fluid dynamics, what happens in the atria, as you see here, and in the ventricles. And we use the Navier-Stokes equations. The Navier-Stokes equations for incompressible viscous fluids. We have the momentum equations, and we have the continuity equation. And here U is the velocity field, P is the pressure. But these equations hold in a domain which is mobile, which is not fixed, it's not given. And also the shape of the domain, which are the atria and the ventricles, are unknowns. So this is why we need extra equations to generate the geometry. So this extra equation can be partial differential equation based on Laplace equation to compute the harmonic extension of what happens at the surface. So this is the fluid dynamics model. But this is not all, because we have the valves. As you see here, we have the valves that open and close, and these valves need to be modeled. And here is the way we model them. We are changing the momentum equation of Navier-Stokes by inserting extra terms. And these extra terms are Dirac functions that are localized on the surface of the valves. So these extra terms are there to compute extra forces that contribute to the momentum equation, and these extra forces are due to the fact that we have valves that are embedded into the computational domain for the fluid. Finally, we have the perfusion. What does that mean, perfusion? Well, it means that we have the heart and the coronaries. The coronaries are arteries that supply blood to the myocardium. We have large coronaries, like the one that you see here. So these coronaries here, right, which are those that you can obtain from medical images. But then we have very, very, very fine coronaries that occupy the whole myocardium. And in our model, we compute the order of 80,000 small coronaries. And we use Navier-Stokes equations in the large coronaries, but we use Darcy equation for the small coronaries. And actually, we are using a multi-scale Darcy model. In every point, we assume that there are coronaries with 3 different scales that coexist together. So we have Darcy equation on 3 different scales, and all these are interconnected. And of course, they exchange information among them. So this is what we solve, and what you see here is the electromechanical model, which activates the fluid dynamics model, and in its turn, it activates the perfusion of the myocardium. So this is the logical processes that occur in the heart. And just to give you an idea, these are the most important equations that we are actually considering. And these equations take into consideration the ionic dynamics on every single cell, the electrical field that propagates. So this is a system of nonlinear reaction diffusion equations. We have the external circulation, that we model with a system of ordinary differential equations. We have the generation of the active forces on every single cardiomyocyte. We have the generation of the complete mechanics or mechanical forces. This is say an electrodynamics equation will allow the whole myocardium to relax and to contract. Then we have the Navier-Stokes equations with the terms that are there to simulate the presence of the valves. We have the Navier-Stokes equations coupled with the Darcy equations for the perfusion. And then we have another set of equations to reconstruct the ECG. ECG are the electrocardiograms, namely to reconstruct the the electrical field on the torso of individual, starting from the electrical field of the myocardium. So all these equations are connected together. They are, say, coupled together by suitable quantities, and these will provide what we have called the integrated mathematical heart model. So this is actually a heart simulator, a mathematical model that can simulate the behavior and the function of the heart. Now, to give you the idea of what we can obtain, let us go to the simulation. I will not discuss about the numerical models that we have to use, because obviously we cannot solve those equations in exact terms, as you know, so we need to use a numerical approximation. And here are some examples. What you see here is the electrophysiology. Electrophysiology means the way the electric potential propagates through the myocardium. And here the scale is in terms of the millivolt, and the millivolt are the transmembrane potential. So in the upper part, you go from -80 to +20 millivolt. These are the atria. In the lower part, we go from -80 to +40 millivolt. And what you see here on the right-hand side are the surfaces of the wavefront that propagate the electrical signal through our heart, say. And what you see on the left-hand side is what we call the activation map. And the doctors, the electrophysiologists, are very acquainted with this type of map. This map is made of isolines, and every isoline connects points that are electrically activated at the same time. What you see here is a beating heart, and what you see are the concentration in micromoles of the calcium ions. The calcium is the most responsible for the deformation of the heart. So you see a heart beating, and you see the change in the calcium concentration. You go from 0.1, the blue part, to 0.8, the red part, and again is in micromoles. This is the active tension. What is the active tension? Is the force that is generated at every single cardiomyocyte because of the presence of the electrical field. Here you see the complete displacement of the heart, and you see it from the outside, from what is called the epicardium, which is the external surface of the heart. You see the upper part, which is made of the atria, and the lower part, which is made of the ventricle. And you see that we go from 0 up to 16 millimeters. In this case, is 1.6 centimeters. So it's a big deformation. So this is a heart beating. And this is the fluid dynamics. This is the left ventricle and the left atrium and the left ventricle. What you see here is the pressure, the way the pressure changes in millimeter per mercury. We go from 0 up to 120. What you see on the left-hand side is the velocity field in meter per second. And those are the two, say, valves that separate the upper part to the lower part and the lower part to the ascending aorta, say. And what you see here on the right is again the velocity, but now we are reproducing the most important, say, vortices. And it's indeed a kind of almost turbulent behavior is a permanent transition toward the turbulence of the electrical field. And this is the way the perfusion occurs in the heart, and this is the way the fluid dynamics happens in the whole heart, say. So those are very important, say, simulation, and I would like to give you the, say, an idea of the cost of this simulation. We are simulating a single heartbeat. One heartbeat that takes about 1 second of real life. We're using 1.7 million of finite element nodes, 20 millions of degrees of freedom for the partial differential equations, around 31 million of degrees of freedom of unknowns for the ordinary differential equations. We're using for every heartbeat, every second, 16,000 time steps, which means that we solve 16,000 the complete dynamics for every heartbeat. In total, we are dealing with 700 billion of variables for the solver. And we solve it on a big supercomputer with 1,100 cores, meaning computers, on a supercomputer which is located in Sinica in Italy. It's called Galileo. And to give you an idea, to solve a single heartbeat with all these variables, it takes 4 hours. So this means this supercomputer, which is only used for this type of simulation, 4 hours of this gigantic supercomputer for solving this problem. It costs about 2,000 euros because, of course, using a supercomputer, you need to pay for it. It consumes 100 kilo watt per hour of energy. It's a big consumption. And it produces 35 kilos of CO2. And this is just to give you an idea that mathematics is costly if you really want to solve problems of real life interest. And that's why you need to develop better models and more efficient and accurate numerical methods to improve our mathematics. We need a better mathematics for a more sustainable world. And this is very important. And this is where we can take advantage of artificial intelligence, for instance. And to motivate it, let me just tell you that until last century, the 3 pillars of scientific methodology were the theory, the experiment, and the simulation. The theory since ever, right? With Pythagoras, Einstein, Schrödinger, where we end up with equations that are fundamental and they're true forever. The experiments from Newton and Galileo tried to set up experiments to validate theories. And then since the mid of the 90s, the simulation, which was made possible thanks to the use of computers. This is a picture of von Neumann, for instance. So being excellent in science required being excellent in all the 3 areas, the theory, experiments, and the simulation. Now, today, we can do better. Why this? Because we have a 4th pillar, which are big data that are generated from satellites, from sensors, social media, and from medical images. And thanks to that, we can develop algorithms that are based on machine learning or artificial intelligence. And we can do it to serve multiple purposes, to reduce the model, going from a big model to a smaller model, right? And saving time, having a more efficient mathematical and numerical models. We can use these models these methods, these algorithms, to learn a model where you do not know the partial differential equation because you do not know enough about the physical model. So you can use it not to find equations, but to find the input-output map that allow you to go from an input to an output. We use it for parameter estimation and for parameter calibration. We use it for sensitivity analysis, try to see out of the many parameters which are the most influential for our solution. And we are actually using what we call the physics-based models, those based on partial differential equations that we have seen until now with machine learning algorithms, and try to have interaction between these 2 models, these two approaches. And this is the way we are integrating, say, models based on partial differential equations with models based on availability of data. And to give you an idea, these are some examples of how to use these models, how to use them in an integrated manner. You know that you can use neural networks. Neural networks tend to simulate the behavior of the neurons in the brain, right? And here is a way to use, in a combined manner, neural networks and partial differential equations to learn the dynamics, to learn the way the active force, which is generated by the electrical field, is originated at every single cell, say. And so we are combining partial differential equation with neural networks in order to save time and to save a substantial amount of time, right? For instance, here we generate a speed up of 400 times, which means that it takes 400 times less using artificial neural network combined with partial differential equation than using solely partial differential equation. And if you look at the memory that is being used, we go from 2,000 to 24 variables for nodal point. So it's a very substantial saving. We use physics-informed neural network for estimating the ionic parameters that would not be otherwise available for every single patient. We use, again, artificial neural network to construct emulators of the fluid dynamics for every single cardiac chamber, for instance, for the ventricle. We use, again, artificial neural network as a surrogate for the electromechanics of every single ventricle. We use artificial neural network for a global sensitivity analysis. If you look at this picture on the left-hand side, this is a matrix where you see on the lines, on the rows, these 36 parameters that characterize our model. And on the columns, you see 20 quantities, which are the output quantities that are relevant for doctors, like, as you see, the volume, the minimal volume of the left atrium, the maximum volume of the left atrium, the minimum pressure in the left atrium, the maximum pressure in the left atrium, and so on and so forth. So you cannot explore all this set of parameters. You need to end up with some sophisticated and reduced order models to understand which are the most influential. And using Monte Carlo simulation and suitable artificial neural networks, we can end up by identifying those parameters that are most important for specific quantities in the end. And we'll only be using those parameters in our models. We use Sarokal model for Bayesian parameter estimation. We use deep learning artificial neural networks to realize reduced order models for the mechanical deformation. We use physics-aware neural network to solve inverse problems when you have, say, data only the torso of the domain, and we want to reconstruct, like here for the electrocardiogram, and we want to reconstruct information on the real ventricle, on the global ventricle. So here are examples on, of course, are very sketchy, very quick, but on the way you can actually combine artificial neural networks and machine learning with partial differential equation to end up with more robust and efficient numerical algorithms. Now, I would like to give you an idea of the type of problem that we can address at the clinical level with this art simulator. As you have seen, this is a very complex and sophisticated mathematical model, but then we want to use it for doctors, to help doctors solving problems. And here are examples of problems coronary artery diseases, dysfunctions of the valves, when the valves undergo very severe stresses, for instance, predicting the risk of rupture of aortic aneurysms, helping understanding arrhythmias. Arrhythmias means electrical irregular function of the heart, or cardiomyopathies, or heart failure, say. And here are some examples with the name of different hospitals with which you collaborate. You see, this is a transmembrane potential in an atrium that is not working properly, and we want to identify the regions that we call slow conduction corridors, where this electrical conduction is too slow and degenerates then this contraction that are not regular, as you see. So in those circumstances, the heart cannot contract properly, and therefore you cannot assure, say, the proper amount of blood that is ejected out of the heart. So this is going to be very severe. And this is similar type of behavior now for the ventricle. We want to find what doctors call the biomarkers, regions that are critical, and we want to compute them by numerical simulation without using invasive tools like cameras or catheters in the ventricle, say. We want to compute the effect of accounting for the mechanics for electrical dysfunctions. And we do it with Johns Hopkins University in the United States. We compute with other hospitals what we call the simulation of the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. What is it? Well, as you probably know, to separate ventricles from the atria, there is a septum, which is a muscular region. In case the septum is too large, too thick, then it will go to create an obstruction to this valve, which is the aortic valve. And this means that this aortic valve cannot open correctly, which means that when the ventricle contracts, the blood that is ejected into the main aorta is not enough. So doctors have to just cut part of this septum. And here we want to use an optimal shape design analysis to find which is the lowest possible part to cut before actually cutting it. So is an optimal design for a surgical operation. This is the implantation of a valve, which is called transcatheter aortic valve implantation. It's called TAVI. And we want to find indicators, mathematical indicators, to find those patients for which it is worthwhile to implant this valve. Because in some cases, it will not be worth it to implant this valve. So we want to do it before actually implanting this valve. And this is yet another application where we want to predict the perfusion of the myocardium by coronaries that are partially occluded, and so on and so forth. And I would like to conclude, since my time is almost over, by giving you an idea on the way I can foresee the new clinical, say, support thanks to mathematics. Today, if you go to a hospital, if a patient, doctors can decide on the therapy on the basis of images, on the basis of measurements, and on the basis of previous clinical history and the possible existence of comorbidities. But we can do much better. We can use mathematical models to find shapes and morphologies, to reconstruct shape and morphologies of, say, of the heart, for instance, and then computing biomarkers and clinical indicators like velocity field, pressure field, electrical field, thanks to mathematical models. And so we are learning from physics. At the same time, we can use machine learning to learn from data, as you've seen before, and then computing what we can call today digital twin. And thanks to the digital twin, we can improve the diagnosis. We can find optimal surgery or designing optimal devices, and we can improve the therapy planning. So we can actually do much better than what is actually done today at the medical level. And again, it's a matter of cooperation. We are not replacing doctors, of course. We want to cooperate with them. But there is a very strong role that mathematics can play in order to improve the clinical processes, thanks to mathematics. And I'd like to conclude by thanking my young colleagues who have helped me to develop this iHeart simulator, which is, we believe, the first one in the world with all this complexity, with all this mathematical completeness, and which is capable actually of simulating the heartbeat of real heart. And with that, I would like to stop and stop sharing. And in case there are questions, please ask directly.
So thank you very much, Professor Alfio, for this very wonderful talk. So now we open the turn for question or comments. If anyone has some question or comment, please open your microphone or type your question in the chat.
Can I ask?
Yes, please, Denise.
Olá, Professor Alfio. Nice to meet you. It's a great pleasure. And nice talk. Thank you for the talk. And I would like to ask about the interdisciplinarity between your job and with some others professionals to do this work.
Yes, Denise, good question. As you can imagine, we need a lot of cooperation from doctors, first of all. So we start from medical doctors. They ask the questions, and we also always start from those questions. We have developed our mathematical model, which is very general. It's also good for physiological heart, for heart working properly. But of course, doctors are interested in pathologies. So their questions are extremely important. Then in my team, there are mathematical analysts, because we have models with many different partial differential equations, very complicated, as you've seen. We have numerical analysts, because you need to find proper numerical models. And we need people who can work actually on supercomputers. And of course, we have computational scientists as well. But in the end, we have to return to doctors, because what we do needs to be validated. So we need to solve the problems, and then in the end, compute quantities and compare with what doctors say. So we go from doctors to theoretical analysts, to numerical analysts, to computational scientists, and again to doctor. This is the kind of
great team. So many people to do it.
Yeah, you need people to address those type of complexities, I think.
Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Okay, next question is Enrique, please go ahead.
Okay, above all, excuse me for the problems I have had before. I was supposed to introduce you, but it was not possible. So thank you very much for your talk, for your very interesting talk. I have two questions. The first one is, in view of your experience, have you identified any interesting property of the heart from a geometrical or functional viewpoint that makes it work optimally? I mean, you look at the heart. The heart could be could have another shape, another form. Why is it the heart as it is?
That's a very good point. And actually, I've been thinking to that many times. Is the actual heart, human heart, fulfilling some optimality criteria? Very hard to answer. If you look at the heart of a snail, is a linear pump. So, and if you look at other animals, you have hearts of many different shapes. Even hearts with only one ventricle and one atria, of or animals with 2 ventricles and 1 atria. So in nature, you find many, many different realizations of the heart. Why the heart of individuals is so complex? Extremely difficult to answer. Of course, if you just look at a single process, say fluid dynamics, you can identify shapes of the ventricles that are more functional to others, for instance, to reproduce more laminar or less turbulent flow. If you look at the conducibility of the electrical field, you end up with different type of shapes. If you look at the deformation, the mechanical deformation, again, you have different type of optimal shapes. So you cannot isolate a single process to look for optimality. And why is all this hyper complex shape good? I don't know if you can say optimal in a mathematical perspective. We don't know. But certainly what you can say is that this is the most efficient pump ever built, not only in nature, but also artificially. There are no other pumps, even artificial, that have this type of, say, efficiency. And this is a kind of, I don't know, superhuman, right? So if you believe in God, you think that there is a design principle which is behind this, too difficult to explain mathematically, which has brought us to go there. If you believe in nature, well, you can say that the evolution of nature has been so sophisticated that now we have a heart which looks very complex, but is extremely efficient. But you do not know in 1 million years from now if it will still have this shape. In other words, are we at the end of this evolution process? Actually, we do not know. But this is a very, deep question.
Okay, thank you. And my second question was connected to the last part of your talk, where you have been speaking about implants and bypass. Have you applied optimal design techniques there to deduce the place in which, for example, a bypass has to be connected in a fixed vein, in a fixed arteria?
Yes, actually, we started some time ago with this type of work. We did it for bypasses because the point is that this procedure is very empirical at the clinical level. But of course, we are only able to do something by looking only at the fluid dynamics part. So disregarding the deformation and disregarding the electrical field. So when you isolate a specific submodel, we call it core model, we need some optimal shape design, also for valves. But you have to isolate only a subset of the complete model. For the complete model, we are not able to solve any optimality or shape design, optimality, say, criteria, fulfill any shape optimality criteria because it's too complicated.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, so another question is by Professor Hernan Cortés. So go ahead.
Only my question is about what is the problem that the professor are using? Is MATLAB, Python, or?
Okay, we developed a library in finite elements and the high order spectral methods, which is in basically in C++. We call it LifeX. It consists in about 130,000 lines of code with basically C++, but algorithms, specific algorithms that implement neural networks are in Python. We have different type of languages indeed, but these are the most prominent. It really depends on the specific task that you want to realize. In any case, this LifeX library is available to everybody. So if you want to use it, you can use it.
only one question. What is the characteristic in the problem of the COVID, the complication, in the heart for the person with COVID?
Okay, we have been working for COVID. In COVID, there are, of course, many different problems that arise. And one of these problems is that the resistances in the lungs increase a lot, which means that this is one problem. The consequence is that our, right ventricle that has to pump blood to the lungs will need more force, and will have to contract more quickly. So typically you have fever, temperature, and more stresses, say, larger stresses. But there is another issue, and this is this blood saturation. The blood is not properly saturated by oxygen, which means that the oxygen, the blood that goes from the lung to the ventricles, the amount of oxygen is not enough, which means in particular that at the cell level, the oxygen that will arrive is too low, and then every single cardiomyocyte will contract not efficiently, say. So we are going and consider this type of variations and see the way the complete mathematical model for the heart is affected by this variation. So I've been connecting basically the lung with the heart and taking into consideration these two characteristics, nerve characteristics.
Oh, many things. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, is there any other question?
I see Orlando asking what motivated your interest in modeling the heart. Can the temperature be considered in the model? Right. So yes, you can consider temperature, but it's not that important indeed. I mean, of course, everything is important, but when you have to model, you have to decide what is more relevant, and temperature in general is not that relevant. What motivated me? Well, I started long ago, about 20 years ago, to solve problems not in the heart, but in the external circulation. And then 6, 7 years ago, I thought that it would have been extremely challenging to address the heart model. Of course, there were already many different groups around the world working on this, but I wanted to bring a mathematical perspective. So try to have a complete mathematical model to simulate the heart. And the point is that the main motivation is that in countries, in rich countries, there is more than the 35% of the population that dies because of heart problems. So the heart pathologies are the most responsible for death in countries where people have a relatively high level of richness, say. And this is why it's so important to try to bring with mathematics new knowledge into this field. This is what drove me there.
Okay. Thank you. So is there any other question or comment? It seems not. So let us thanks again, Professor Alfio Quarteroni, for this very nice talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diego.
Okay,
thank
Juan.
you a lot, Professor Alfio Quarteroni, for your excellent talk.
Thank you.